Welcome to the Grand Solar Minimum channel. Today is Tuesday, August 30th, 2022. Let's get started tonight because I've got a pretty interesting show lined up for us. Let's talk about space weather first. Let's get into the Grand Solar Minimum stuff, and then we can go into the climate talk. Right now, we are looking at our very active sun, and as me and others who agree that we are possibly seeing the beginning of the maximum of solar cycle 25, right now we are seeing moderate activity off of the sun, but between AR 20, wait, I'm sorry, AR 3089 and AR 3088, those two sunspots are producing quite a bit of CMEs, and I'll get into some more of that footage here just in a bit. But as you can see, we've got a pretty decent sized coronal hole that is starting to turn Earth facing, and we should see that actually be Earth facing by, say, the second, third of August, possibly late August 2nd. And we are expecting some geomagnetic activity from that particular region. So another 36 hours to 48 hours from the second or third, we could see some kind of G2 storm around the 4th or 5th of September, depending on the speed of this solar wind. Now, right now, I would have to say that this is going to be a moderately fast solar wind. This is a wider coronal hole. This is just as wide as the big one that we had in the southern part of our star that actually had a sunspot inside of a coronal hole. And I laugh because this was something that I heard about years ago when I started the research 7 years ago. And I remember Lee telling me that a big worry during this time, the grand solar minimum, are phenomena like sunspots forming inside of coronal holes and an umbra snapping and getting caught up in solar wind. Well, I can only imagine that the solar wind would propel that plasma that would be heading towards, hopefully not Earth, but anywhere in the solar system. And that could cause some serious problems for anybody in the solar system if they are in that path. So we are at the very, very beginning of this grand solar minimum cycle. In fact, a lot of people don't believe it's not going to really kick off until in the early part of 2030. But I think if you go back and look at Valentina Zarkova's work and review it and understand the graphs and charts that she's showing us, she ran her model at a 97% accuracy for solar cycle 24. And her prediction for solar cycle 25 is coming to fruition so far. And that's why I have to follow what the sun's telling us and what Zarkova's work has told us as well, that we are actually in the beginning of a max and could see a minimum starting as early as late 23, early 24. Cosmic radiation won't go away. 2%, that's nothing to compare to what we saw during solar minimum. But in a maximum, and this just gives us another example of how weak this maximum actually is going to be. But during a maximum, we should have cosmic radiation dosage rates that are in the negative. And I mean negative 10, negative 15%. And we're still seeing rates over 0%. We saw rates at 5% or higher until about 2 months ago. So, in my opinion, yes, it is a weak max. And some can argue and say that's because we're not anywhere near the max. But time will tell. And so far, when you look at the sunspots and the locations of these sunspots, that saying out there, location, location, location. Well, that's what we are basing our decision here about the possibility of a maximum beginning. We are well within that range with these sunspots. Yes, we are still seeing some at the 20, but during the beginning of this cycle, 30 is where we start. All right. Yeah, we do have a high sunspot here, but we have more low spot. Look at this one here. And the prominence here on the last clip here at the end of this movie is right there on the equatorial region. So when you have these sunspots migrating into the equatorial region like this here, these are far south, but again, this is where they should be for this cycle. But as you can see here in the backside, we got some action in our corona here, which gives me an idea that we will see sunspot activity in this vicinity or near the equatorial region. And again, that only happens during maximum into minimum. And then basically the sunspots in the middle will stay there for a while before they start sputtering out and head into the next minimum. So I feel like the position of some of our sunspots have been quickly accelerated to the equatorial region. Yes, we have had a line of sunspot activity far much south than usual, but again, we've seen it change. And right now is no different than what we've seen so far in this cycle. KPNC at a 2 and the 24-hour max at a 4. We've had a couple of moderate earthquakes today. One was a 6.3 somewhere in the Pacific. I know, right? Pretty lame. But, I mean, that's usual. So nothing really to report. So nothing really huge seismic activity-wise right now at the time. I want to go over to our website, thegrandsolarminimum.com. And let's go over a few additional stats here on our website. First, let's go to the solar terrestrial data because it's interesting. The solar X-ray flux, kind of important here. Look at how active that our sunspots have been today. Actually, the last 24 hours. Several M-class flares. In fact, they are showing us that this M-class flare that was actually an X-class flare. Where'd it go? Right here. I know it's touching the line, but that sunspot, as it was turning away from Earth and going over the eastern limb, or the western limb, I'm sorry. Remember, it's opposite. It's not the same east-west, left-right, whatever. It's the opposite. So when I say western limb, it's going to be to your right. Eastern limb is going to be to your left. It's just, that's the way they call it. But anyway, this sunspot was rotating away from Earth, heading out of sight, and as it was going to what we consider the backside of the sun, it did blow out a very minor X-class flare. Now, I had noticed the same day in that morning that we had a 25% chance of an X flare. And I thought, that's interesting. This sunspot's on its way out. And sure enough, right as it exited, it happened. So some things that we've definitely dodged some bullets. Absolutely. And I'll show you that here in the last go. Take a look at these explosions that we've had from the sun over the past several days. And, there you go. This is just several days of footage here through the 27th and the 28th. This is the latest, but we had a flurry of activity before the 27th and a steady flow of activity. And this is definitely an active sun. So I don't understand why it's so impossible to think that we actually are in a maximum time. Obviously, the sun is kicking it up full notch right now. This is not minimum status. This is not moderate, but it's still weak. The amount of geomagnetic storms thus far in this solar cycle have been very weak between G1 and G2. That's not a big deal. Not when we have much stronger and more potent storms. G3, G4, G5 does the damage, but we don't really see a lot of those, thankfully. But it is possible, though, during this particular solar cycle right now. All right. Let's take a look at a couple more stats before we head over to the main attraction tonight. Oh, yes, I have something good for us tonight to watch. Very interesting stuff. Let's go to the backside of the sun. Are we going to continue to be active? Yes, look at that. The southern hemisphere of the sun is definitely going to start picking up once again in the sunspot department. We could see over 100 in the smooth sunspot number. It just depends. Remember, we have seen multiple regions show up on the map as very bright, very large, and then nothing happens. So we'll continue to monitor this, but this is what I wanted to show you. This region here and here. This is the region that's closer to the equatorial region. Obviously, these guys here are around the 20. Again, we should be around the 30 or higher. And we are migrating already to the middle, which shows that we are into our max. And again, Valentina Zarkova's work shows that we have a shortened, abbreviated cycle with an extended minimum. She was 90% correct last time, so all right. Now, tonight's special is on a Twitter influence. His name is Gerald Kootenay. And Mr. Kootenay has been a part of conversations that I've had with him and his cronies for quite some time. Actually, he is constantly questioning the science of natural climate cycles and calls us the deniers. And I think he's a bully. He wishes for people to go to hell if they don't believe in what he believes in. And it's just on and on and on. This guy is just a trip. Anyway, I didn't see it, so I was going to show you something else. But however, tonight I want to go over a interview that's about 11 minutes long. I'm delighted now. And it's important to know that this guy that we are going to feature tonight, Gerald Kootenay, who's on Twitter, hopefully he's in the chat, because I told him it'd be only fair that if he came over and said hello and defended himself if he didn't agree with my analysis on this interview. So without further ado, here is Richard Tice talking to Gerald Kootenay. By the way, Kootenay is an AGW supporter and owns, or not owns, but he is a CEO or a director of 2 biomass companies in Canada and is heavily invested in burning down forest for energy. So let's take a listen.
To be joined, having had a gentleman called Brian Catt on the show a couple of weeks ago, from one side of the climate debate. Quite rightly, I was challenged on messages to say, well, could you get someone on from the other side of the debate? And that's completely fair and proper. And I hope, in a sense, that this section gets as many views as my chat with Brian Catt got 2 weeks ago. We had over 500,000 views, and I'm delighted to welcome now, all the way on Zoom from Ottawa in Canada, is Gerald Kootenay, who is a PhD in chemistry, and until recently, an adjunct professor of environmental science at the University of Northern British Columbia. Not only that, I've done a bit of research, but I believe, he'll correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that Gerald is ranked 16th out of 500 on the SUSTMEM for climate and energy as one of the leading influencers online. And, you know, Gerald very much believes that climate change, I think, potentially is a growing risk of catastrophe, but we'll get into that. Gerald, a very good, well, it's morning to you. I think it's about 7 in the morning. Thank you for waking up early. It's good afternoon here. But Gerald, I think you picked up on my debate with Brian Catt, and it's fair to say that you were pretty punchy about coming back at me. The the message you said was that I was disgraceful for even giving Brian Catt airtime. Gerald, do you believe in free speech?
I believe in free speech, but you also have to look at the credibility of the free speech is. I think it's important when we talk.
So he wants to believe in free speech as long as it goes along with his beliefs.
Important issues like climate change, that the people to discuss it have some credibility if they're going to criticize it.
But surely that's not free speech, Gerald. I mean, well, there are some people who are obviously very highly qualified, but the rest of us should be allowed to be able to debate it, shouldn't we?
Oh, you can debate anything you'd like, but no one has to pay attention to it. Credibility.
You can debate all you like, but nobody has to pay attention to it. And this guy is so smug. And the thing that bothers me about this guy is that, for months, I have never heard him talk before. I've never seen him in interviews before. He has quite the fan base in Canada. But till this interview, and this really exposes, the cluelessness of these rich old people who are basically preaching what their master tells them to say. Plain and simple. And so, again, this guy is very dishonest, very deceitful, very smug. And I think the host, Richard, does a good job at asking the right questions without getting his emotions caught up in this. Let's continue to watch.
Everything in an issue like this is too important for uncredible opinions to criticize science. Science criticizes itself, and everyone can have an opinion. I totally agree with that, but it doesn't mean anything.
But the point is that science is never settled, is it, Gerald? I mean, science evolves because scientists quite properly challenge each other's conclusions. And of course, evidence changes over time. So, science is never settled.
That's a fair point. I totally agree with that. But one thing that science is accepted.
So he tells you that it's a fair point that the science is never settled, but it's accepted. So everything but climate science is not settled, but we accept this science, so stop asking questions about it. That's basically what he's saying.
That means is a theory is accepted by the greater scientific community until new evidence suggests otherwise, if that ever happens.
Okay, but for example, just recently there's a new group called Clintel with over 1,000 scientists and experienced professionals who signed up to it, putting a different point of view, some very eminent and credible people within that. It seems to me that your approach to this debate is that, in a sense, you're not allowed to debate it or talk about it unless you're highly qualified and agree with your line of opinion.
My point is there is no debate over the science.
Of course there is. There's always debate about science. That's the definition of science. It evolves.
Not the science of climate change. It's not at all. Again.
So again, you see how these AGW climate nutballs move the goalpost, change the strike zone. No, for Gerald in his fantasy land, this guy's totally creepy too. I don't know what's he looking up at. Is he like in one of those gaming chairs and he's reclined back and he's got like this 45-inch screen that's just surrounding him that's curved, and I don't know. Anyway, but here he is, completely smug, completely double talking. I think Richard's doing a really great job here of keeping us cool because he's this is insulting when you're a host and you invite a guest on to debate a topic. Usually you should come with actual facts, data, references, and things to base your claims on. And so to me, this is very disrespectful of Gerald. And let's continue to listen, though. This is Typical AGW cult-like mindset.
You confuse the idea of someone with an unqualified opinion versus new evidence that suggests the science is wrong. Again, people can argue all they want, but that doesn't change the science. The science is clear. It's been clear about climate change for over 3 decades.
So what science are you referring to there, Gerald?
I'm talking about that climate change is real. It's mainly caused by us, and it's something that we need to deal with urgency.
And but do you think, so therefore, do you think I'm a denier, Gerald?
Yeah, I do.
Really?
Yes.
How long has climate change gone on for, Gerald?
The typical climate denier question is.
So he's asking him, how many years are you basing this off of? And instead of answering with the facts and the years that you should answer with, he is answering his question with a question. And Mom always told me that's a liar, if I ever heard one.
Climate change has been changing forever. But what makes the current climate change special is that this time is caused by us. It's taking place at a rate that's never been seen before. And so why that's important is if it's caused by us, then we can stop it.
Okay, so you think I've been denied. Gerald, what car do you drive? Do you drive an electric car?
I wish I did, but no, I don't. And
so you drive a fossil fueled car?
I do.
Really?
Okay, so he asked if he drives a fossil fuel. So anybody out there who thinks he's in a wheelchair, I mean, it's possible he has special setup in his car, and that's why he can drive, because he's got the tools to set up. I'm not saying that, but again, I'm not making fun of this guy. He just, the way he acts on Twitter, if he is in a wheelchair and he's paralyzed or something, then this totally makes sense why he is so vicious and so ignorant and just persistent on calling people like us who watch this channel climate deniers, when we all know that right now AGW is hijacking the beginning effects of climate change due to natural solar cycles. This is all part of their Green New Deal, changing the economy plan, because they knew this extreme weather would happen, these 1 in 1,000 year floods. These aren't because of climate change, folks. It's because of the cycle that we're in. And I don't know if a lot of you understand the seriousness of this grand solar minimum. Yes, it will be short-lived, but in the Maunder minimum, it's worth reporting here, folks. In the Maunder minimum, the cooling that we saw from Maunder minimum was because of 2 of the magnetic poles of the sun going out of phase. In this grand solar minimum, Dr. Zarkova is calling for all four magnetic poles going out of phase. This is something that we don't have a model to follow. Yeah, I'm saying some pretty heavy stuff right now, but it's the truth. If you follow her work, if you actually read the papers and realize what is going on, then all those people out there in the beginning that were predicting of really bad stuff to come, well, maybe they weren't wrong in the first place. Because I don't think really folks understand the science of solar cycles and how bad the Maunder minimum was. And that was only 2 magnetic poles going out of phase. What is it going to do when all 4 go out of phase? What kind of cooling? And what's that going to do to our magnetosphere? Think about the increased amount of cosmic radiation that is going to flux this atmosphere during the 2030s and the 2040s. Lots to think about, folks. But again, all this extreme weather that's coming in the near future is from cosmic radiation exposure, cloud nucleation, water vapor. Obviously, underground volcanoes are going to occur even more as we get back into the minimum. Yeah, the natural cycles play a huge role in climate change. And I'll go more into that too here in a minute.
What car I drive, Gerald?
No, I don't.
Have a guess.
I hope it's an EV.
I drive an electric vehicle.
Excellent.
Have you invested in any solar panels, Gerald, to reduce
No,
emissions?
I have not.
You've not. So
No.
you haven't. So in a sense, you're saying the science is settled and you presume it's a catastrophe, and yet you don't have an electric car and you haven't invested in solar panels. I've got an electric car. I've invested in hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of solar panels that are saving hundreds of tons of CO2 every single year. How dare you accuse me and smear me and label me for being a denier when I'm doing more to reduce emissions than you are?
So I'll take it back if you say that you agree that climate change is real and it is caused by us and we have to do something to tackle it.
Gerald, I've always said that climate change has existed since the year dot, and it will continue to exist. And I'm a fan of reducing emissions because I want cleaner, quieter cities. I live in them, and that's what I mean. What I'm not convinced about is that we're facing a climate catastrophe, and hopefully you can correct me if I'm wrong, but no one's presented any science to me that shows that if we get to net zero, if we get there, that's going to make any difference to climate change, which is affected by things that are much, much bigger than CO2.
All right, sorry about that. As I was saying, they okay. Sorry, God, I'm sorry, guys. I keep muting the mic. I apologize. So this is a chart with our CO2 over 600 million years. And yes, technically you're not supposed to splice current data with this kind of prehistoric stuff, but there is a good point to this. We have ice core technology 600 million years ago. Today we have very precise instruments that will measure the exact amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. And if you look at this, folks, I mean, we are at that very, very minimal above this 400 parts per million of CO2. You can see 600 million years ago, life did not exist on planet Earth because of all the CO2. We cannot survive at that rate. I think it's 10,000, maybe it's over 5,000 parts per million. That's not sustainable for humans. So obviously, we couldn't have survived on this planet till right around, 350 million years ago. And then after that, well, we started to see a steep decline in CO2. Interesting, right? Because the temperature data that you see today is trying to convince you that there is, as my concerned baby boomer, I focus on what I can do personally to battle climate change to protect the Amazon. That is truth. But anyway, the AGW wants to tell you that your emissions are killing the planet because CO2 600 million years ago was here because of all the private jets that we had and, all the emissions in the atmosphere 600 million years ago. Hell, who knows? There could have been a crazy civilization out here. So I guess I shouldn't speak on such things. But anyway, let's get back to the video here. I just wanted to point that out real quick because it's important that whenever they have asked a question to Mr. Kootenai about the CO2, the technicals of the science. Mr. Kootenai dodges the answer by just babbling on about.
Because I'm delighted now to be joined.
Sorry about this, folks.
No,
You haven't. So in a sense, you're saying the science is settled and you presume it's a catastrophe, and yet you don't have an electric car and you haven't invested in solar panels. I've got an electric car. I've invested in hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of solar panels that are saving hundreds of tons of CO2 every single year. How dare you accuse me and smear me and label me for being a denier when I'm doing more to reduce emissions than you are?
so I'll take it back if you say that you agree that climate change is real and is caused by us, and we have to do something to tackle it.
Gerald, I've always said that climate change has existed since the year dot, and it will continue to exist. And I'm a fan of reducing emissions because I want cleaner, quieter cities. I live in them, and that's what I mean. What I'm not convinced about is that we're facing a climate catastrophe, and hopefully you can correct me if I'm wrong, but no one's presented any science to me that shows that if we get to net zero, if we get there, that's going to make any difference to climate change, which is affected by things that are much, much bigger than CO2.
No, that's not true. If we get to net zero, it's not going to improve it. It's going to stop it from becoming worse.
So here we go. Here's the moving the goalpost and moving the strike zone. Now they're saying that getting to zero emissions won't, change course, but it'll stop it from getting worse. So basically, the cat's out of the bag with Mr. Kootenai. No matter what we do, it won't be good enough. I hope there's politicians or friends of politicians that are watching this broadcast somehow, and they show their colleagues the kind of answers that the ranked top 50 influencer of climate change on the internet, and some of the things that he's saying are untrue. He's denying facts. This host told him that there are bigger factors that do have an impact on the temperatures, volcanoes and such. And talk about denial. The only person denying science is Mr. Kootenai.
That's the scary part of climate change. Just answer this one quick question for me. Do you agree that climate change today is mainly caused by humans?
Actually, no, I don't. I think that things like solar variability, things like sea level oscillation, things like volcanic activity, both above ground and in the ocean, have a much, much bigger impact, as they always have done for millions of years, than the quantity of man-made CO2. There's no question. You're absolutely right. CO2 levels have increased. But Gerald, the temperature that we face at the moment, we're about 1% warmer than the coldest point in the last 10,000 years. We're still 2 degrees colder than the warmest point in the last 10,000 years.
I'm not quite sure those stats are correct, but I do.
Typical AGW. I'm not quite sure the facts are correct, but my facts are correct. So I'm not going to believe you because I don't know if that's correct. I don't think the people understand what you're saying, because you're talking about net zero carbon emissions won't stop climate change. It'll just keep it from getting worse. Well, we were told by many world leaders that if we cut out emissions by 2040, that we would be able to save the planet from turning into a hothouse and resume climate to normality. Now these AGW freaks can't keep up with their lies because they're too big, too rich to care, really. They don't think anybody's paying attention. You guys are. This guy is bombing this interview. And folks, he pinned this to the top of his Twitter page.
Appreciate your candor when you're describing how you feel about climate change. But just to get back, by definition, that is the definition of a climate denier. Science does not agree with you. There is no science in the peer-reviewed literature that supports that modern climate change is caused by volcanoes or the sun. That's the rhetoric of climate denialism.
But I've literally proven to you that I'm not a denier, and yet you still try and smear and label me as a denier.
Climate denier is in the sphere is simply a fact. What climate denier means is someone who challenges the accepted science. I've summarized the accepted science to you.
You haven't told me anything about the accepted science. You've just said that it's accepted and it's settled. Science is never settled, and you've given no proof whatsoever, no facts to back up your point.
This is typical AGW. Richard says it all right there. You've given no science. You've given no proof. You've not shown us any science. All he has done is parrot for his master. Okay? His master is telling him to say this, and he's getting his pockets stuffed with millions of dollars from his biomass. And let me tell you something, you know, anybody that wants to support biomass, why don't you go live right next door to a biomass plant? And then you come back and tell me if you like biomass. Your water will smell like campfire all the time. So your clothes will smell like campfire because when you wash your clothes in the water, that smell doesn't come out. And then don't forget about the nasty smell that you have to tolerate. And the energy that it's producing is nowhere near enough to help keep the grid stable. In fact, burning trees makes no sense at all. If you're so worried about increased CO2, then why are you chopping down the one thing that naturally absorbs CO2, especially now when there's so much nitrogen in the bedrock in the atmosphere? Oh man, it's like these trees and vegetation are taking a big inhale and just sucking it all in, and like, yeah, the leaves are getting stronger and bigger and leafy and leather looking and nice and green. And then you chop down the trees and burn it so we have electricity. Makes no sense, man. All right, let's listen in.
What I stated is accepted science remains accepted until new evidence suggests otherwise. There has not been any new evidence in the modern age of climate science, which has extended over half a century. Every decade, the evidence has become stronger and stronger that the science I briefly summarized to you is correct.
So what's interesting here is that you call yourself a climate scientist, and you use social media essentially to try and smear and label people, and you accuse us of disinformation and propaganda, but you're only talking about facts in the last 50 to 100 years or so, since sort of the industrialization period. But I'm looking back at science and data from ice cores and things that goes back 10,000 years plus. So it feels to me that even though I'm not a qualified scientist, I actually think that I'm applying more rigor to the data than you are.
Oh, Richard, boy, he started off really gentle and was almost petting Gerald on the head, saying, hello, my pretty pet. But now the gloves are off. And Richard's right. Richard has given us more facts, more data, more numbers, where they come from, where the science is, than Gerald. Gerald is just a bumper sticker and a t-shirt. That's all he is. He's just a big mouthpiece who doesn't really know anything about climate science. All he knows is that he's getting rich supporting this side of the climate science. Okay. He believes in freedom of speech as long as you're a credible person. So if you're not credible, or if he doesn't view you as credible, then your freedom of speech is worthless. So you could see how ridiculous this guy is. I'm sure it doesn't take much for him to consider you not credible. He does it all the time. He talks about my qualifications on Twitter, argues with me, and then says, okay, I'm not talking to you anymore. And then 3 months later, he comes back in my Twitter feed trying to troll me. And then he does it again. Then he comes back in 3 months. And he's a coward. He's a keyboard warrior. And I'm convinced that that's all this guy does is just sit around and play on his keyboard all day just to get people riled up. I think what they're trying to do is trying to get us so riled and ravaged that we react like Alex Jones on a 24/7 basis. But I want to show you guys tonight is that this AGW that says the science is correct and everything's right about it, but he's not willing to give you any kind of data points or any references whatsoever, folks.
I'm sure you do feel that way. But if you look at the information that you've got that from climate scientists. And climate scientists know in the far distant past, you can go back millions of years if you want to. But when you look at modern climate change, which is the most important to us because we are living that now, we are suffering the consequences of the climate crisis now. Science is clear. It is mainly caused by us.
So what are the consequences that concerns you about rising CO2 levels that we should be so terrified of, Gerald?
The big thing about climate change, which what the word says itself, is the climate is changing, and the big effect is that extreme weather events become more common.
Because I'm delighted now to be joined.
Any new evidence in the modern age of climate science, which is extended over half a century. Every decade.
So what's interesting here is that you call yourself a climate scientist, and you use social media essentially to try and smear and label people, and you accuse us of disinformation and propaganda. But you're only talking about facts in the last 50 to 100 years or so, since sort of the industrialization period. But I'm looking back at science and data from ice cores and things that goes back 10,000 years plus.
Science is clear. It is mainly caused by us.
So what are the consequences that concerns you about rising CO2 levels that we should be so terrified of, Gerald?
All right, my apologies for the technical difficulties. That's the part I wanted to stop it at. When he's asking us, or asking Gerald, what is he so concerned and so terrified about CO2? And again, another example of Gerald dodging the question, not answering it, and talking about climate change because global warming doesn't fit the trend. But folks, everything that Gerald is getting ready to list off, he is hijacking the events that are going to happen during the grand solar minimum. So by making these claims now, and as they happen, the freak extreme storms, the 1 in 1,000 years floods, he could sit there and grin and say, I told you so. Listen up.
The big thing about climate change, which what the word says itself, is the climate is changing, and the big effect is that extreme weather events become more common and more severe. You've seen that in Europe with the major drought that's caused water levels to decrease along the major rivers throughout Europe and in other countries as well.
But we've had droughts and floods before, Gerald. 100 years ago, 96% more people died from extreme weather events than now, because guess what? We're smart, we're intelligent, we work out how to adapt and mitigate.
The stats you're giving are ones that are famous for Lombard for showing up. They're very misleading.
Someone's either dead or they're not dead. How can that be misleading?
The point is that for weather events, extreme weather events, they are more severe and more common than they were in the past. You're showing us statistics that are complicated by many other factors. The important thing is, look at the science. Climate science is clear. It increases the frequency and the severity of extreme weather events.
Gerald, this is brilliant. We're getting loads of messages coming in. We've got to take a break because without the breaks, we can't pay it.
I would love to find the rest of this interview. There's more, but this was tweeted at the top of his page. He's proud of this interview. Now, I know I had a lot of commentary over this, but did you guys see this as a victory for AGW? If you were on the fence right now, let's say you're watching this program and you're on the fence about what climate change is, what causes it, you know, you're on the fence. You just don't know. Is it natural? Is it humans? Or, you know, maybe it is. And then you don't get any answers. And here's a guy who I think is one of Gerald's best friends. But I asked this guy if he knew how much % of the atmosphere was made up of CO2. And as you see here on my Twitter page, I show the answer, obviously, because he starts telling me that I need to Google it. He says, you know, he won't answer the question. And the reason why these guys won't answer the amount of CO2, the percentage of it, is because they would have a more difficult time explaining to folks that CO2 is only 0.04% of the atmosphere. So how hard would it become if you had AGW trolls and people who support it? How will you be able to explain it to brainwash people who believe parrots who are just speaking what their masters tell them to say? AR 3088, by the way, that was a very interesting sunspot, perpendicular polarity. That's right, north and south, folks. Again, we just talked about this. North and south, east and west, all four of these poles are going to go out of phase, and we're already seeing it. And it's puzzling a lot of folks right now, folks. Ain't that the truth? But I hope you guys learned a little bit of something. Oh, by the way, there's talk about Greenland is melting. And I just want to report that Greenland is not melting. Actually, today, David Birch reported that we had one of the largest gains in snow mass in Greenland. Here it is. Look at that. Look at that. Holy cow. Let me get my handy dandy arrow out here. Look at that. Holy schmoly. So look at how high that is. When was the last time we had snow gain like that? This is a big event. And it was all the way back in March 14th, 2022. So here we are in August, well above the median line. We're not even into autumn, and Greenland gets a 6.8 gigatons gain in one day. It's not winter in the Northern Hemisphere, folks. So Mari said this best earlier tonight. We have these people in a corner. They can't explain the science. They get asked direct questions on a constant basis. And just like the person I asked about if he understood how much CO2 was in the atmosphere, how much of the atmosphere was made up of, he wouldn't answer that. And the reason why he wouldn't answer that is because he would not be able to explain to people logically how 0.04% of the atmosphere is driving the climate over a plasma ball that's 93 million miles away and will give you skin cancer. Look, we already have new studies, and Gerald Kootenai talks about we have to have proof to back up this possibility of natural solar cycles causing climate change. Well, that proof is starting to come out. And there was a paper that was featured on What's Up With That about a year or so ago that did confirm that solar cycles do control the ocean oscillations, especially when it comes to La Nina and El Nino. This is peer-reviewed work, nature.com. And the work had shown that solar activity indeed influenced ocean temperatures, the cycles, everything. So, Mr. Kootenai, if you're watching, there is new science that is proving that climate change has indeed happened a lot, and it's natural and caused by the sun. And the only reason why you say the things that you say is because your master pays you to, and you make lots of money doing it, and that's all you do is sit on Twitter and troll. And the reason for my presentation tonight is to basically bid farewell. I've seen enough. I thought you were at least a credible climate scientist after hearing you speak for the first time and hearing you answer questions that were very fair and direct questions. You, sir, obviously don't have a clue what you're talking about. Stop wasting my time and your 67,000 followers' time as well. All right, let's move on because we need to talk about the weather real quick. Some good news. I know the last time we did a broadcast, we thought we were going to be dealing with a hurricane, possibly on Labor Day weekend in the southern border of Texas. Well, I'm here to tell you that we're going to have plenty of rain coming in from this system. But the good news is we are not seeing this hurricane anymore. The one that we thought was going to hit the Bajas is now tracking further west, just like the one that we thought could have hit Texas. And then, yes, there is another system out in the Atlantic, but that is going to curve away from land. That will come nowhere near us. And then another large system moving up in the eastern Pacific up into the Baja area. But as it gets closer to the lower 48, this storm will veer away once again and dissipate. Now, with that being said, let's go back to all this action that we have going on here in the States. This is typical monsoon situation here. Spotted showers all across the United States from the south into the northeast. We may have to get used to this weather here for a little bit. Right now tonight, we are dealing with the system that, folks, is going all the way from northern Canada. And when you look at the extended map, this moisture system is connected all the way into Central America, the Panama Canal. This is a huge system that is connected and drawing moisture all over the Gulf Coast and up the East Coast and into the Northeast. We will continue to see this kind of pattern here off and on. After this showers tonight, though, some much cooler air moving into the Midwest, the Great Lakes, the Northeast. Look at that high pressure dominating right there in the Ohio Valley, West Virginia, mountains regions, and into the Northeast by September 2nd. The beginning of Labor Day weekend looks amazing. If you live in the Great Lakes, Northeast, beautiful weather, good cookout weather, low humidity, lots of sunshine. There is slight chances of showers on Sunday, but let's look at the weather here on Friday in the States. Into Saturday, barbecue plans not looking so good on Saturday. And then Sunday, we have spotty chances of rain in the Northeast overnight. That's important to mention. So most of your cookout time should be done here in the Northeast. Rest of you across from Texas all the way through the Ohio Valley. These are some off again, on again showers. It doesn't look like any kind of severe weather at this moment, but we still have a few more days. So we'll check this run again. And looking at Monday of next week, Labor Day itself, well, that's where we could see some rain for much of the Northeast, Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, Virginia, and Tennessee, parts of Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, Louisiana, also inundated with some rain. But the rest of the country is going to stay pretty dry and pretty nice. We'll take a look at temperatures here just in a second. This is all the way to next Wednesday, and high pressure really dominates for a few days. But then it's almost like the rain moisture picks up once again. Another front that goes from Central America all the way to northern Canada passes through. More high pressure, more dry weather, but then the moisture quickly comes back a little bit faster to the northeast than would expected. And then there's a little bit of a feature here on Sunday, September 11th, that could resemble some problems. But here's the interesting feature of this thing, folks. This looks like, well, let me see. Again, you really can't trust anything that far out. But, okay, yeah. Just interesting feature here. This low pressure system almost looks like a nor'easter, just the way it's shaping out. But again, like I said, it's too early to look at anything for September 11th. This is just an idea, but we do see we get plenty of chances of rain for the south again, the East Coast again, and that monsoon rain pattern is starting to shift east now by the middle of September. Loads of moisture heading across the country again. If this was a fall or a winter feature, that would be a massive snowstorm for sure. Earlier tonight, we did have some snow showers mixed in. I'm not seeing that anymore. Let's see if that shows up. There it is. So there is snow expected in BC and Alberta by the 13th of September. Now, that's nothing unusual. In fact, we've seen snow in August before in Yellowstone. So this is nothing unnormal. September 14th in Montana should have some snow showers. Nothing sticking, nothing major. Just showing you the signs that winter is not far away. And again, this low pressure system, had we have cooler air, that would be an interesting feature in the wintertime. Let's check out temperatures real quick, and then we'll move on. I want to take a look at the hurricane situation one more time, or the lack thereof, because that's been pretty much the situation here so far this season. Thank God we have enough damage already, right? So here is this coming weekend. Actually, this has already happened. So here we are, Monday, Tuesday. Pretty hot. It's been pretty hot. Thankfully, it's summer, right? Dog days of summer. And then we get to September 1st, and it's like a switch flips for the Northeast. Temperatures begin to cool down a little bit, 60s and 70s. Still pretty hot across much of the country in early September. And then a slight pattern change does approach us here in the Great Lakes. Not much, but it does cool things down. It gets really hot out there in the southwest, across the northern plains, in the Montana region as well. So summer not quite over here, but we will start to see improving weather. As you see here in the northeast, temperatures are really starting to take a dip. These areas right here where you see the yellow 70s in the middle of all these 80s, that's because of all the rain that we're going to get. It's actually going to affect the temperature. So cloud coverage and moisture will bring the temperatures down, even though we got that dangerous global warming right next to us. Again, this is hot. I'm not minimizing this. Nobody said we were not going to be hot anymore in the summertime. I said short, hot summers and long, cold winters, and that's exactly what happened last year. Right now, it's also appearing what's going to be the situation for 2022 and 2023. So we get out past the Labor Day weekend, temperatures again moderating because of all the moisture in the south. That's the only good news, but the humidity is still going to be high across the south. So it's not going to feel chilly by any means. It's still going to be pretty warm, but again, it could be a lot worse. And then we get to the middle of September. This is the kickoff for football season. September 11th, very hot across the central plains, Colorado into Denver. Parts of there might reach 99 degrees. Northeast in Ohio, perfect for this time of year. Again, the Northwest should be dipping off as well here soon as we see this pattern change coming by middle September. Look at that cold air that's filtering in from Canada. And already we can see our first major cold front moving across the Northwest into the northern plains, and they deserve it. So we're talking about high temperatures 72 hours prior in the 100s, and 72 hours later, the temperature is going to drop 60 to 70 degrees. Can you say grand solar minimum much? Okay, that's what it is. All right, I want to say hello to a few folks out there. Appreciate you guys tuning in tonight and checking us what we were saying. Please share this. This is an example of all the rhetoric of AGW. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't understand the climate science. They're just telling you to be good little obeying puppets and accept the science. I just saw something here in the chat. M. Wren, Ralph Witze, prediction is correct. We are going there. GSM doesn't look at the map of America and see world events, dry and flood. Tonight there was something that made me think that maybe Ralph is right. Based on reviewing some information I didn't really realize, unfortunately. I apologize, but understanding now what all four magnetic poles going out of phase compared to just the two that happened in the modern minimum really changes the idea of that. Trying to wrap my head around the amount of cosmic radiation that we're going to receive during this time. We ain't seen nothing yet, folks. We keep saying that. And I really believe that in my heart. According to the science that we have been preaching on for, I shouldn't say preaching, but reporting on since the late 2016 has come to fruition. We've been able to connect the dots for seismic activity, volcanic activity. We've been doing it for years. Not just this channel. David from Adapt 2030, Lee Wilbarger, Diamond from Magnetic Reversal, Ice Age Farmer. I might be forgetting other. David Birch. These are the original people that stood by this information and constantly preached on it, and have not. In fact, even when their predictions were a little difficult to accept, they still stood by them. Even so many people, you're crazy, you're fear pouring it up, you're crazy, and it's really starting to wonder now if, well, again, just remember, Lisa B, if they all go out of phase, and we saw what happened when two of the magnetic poles of the sun went out of phase, we had the modern minimum. So if we have all four, then that means our magnetosphere is going to be weaker than anything that we've ever experienced in history. And it could mean big time cosmic radiation dosage rates, all those earthquakes and volcanics predictions in John Casey's upheaval book will come to fruition in the 2030s. I mean, there's so much that has changed in my mind now about grand solar minimum after reviewing this information again. So call it a aha moment, but it's time to start taking this topic seriously. And, you know, folks are like, well, what does it matter if CO2 doesn't change the climate? Don't you want better drinking water and cleaner breath? I do. I also want to stay warm and stay alive. I also want my farmers to be able to make a living when they grow crops and harvest and sell it back to feed us. That's not going to happen under this Green New Deal. This Green New Deal is an economy changer for the world, and there's 200 plus nations that are on board with this. So, of course, you always follow the masses. It's in the video I showed you guys, The Persuasion of Science, or Science of Persuasion, that's what it is. That's all this is. This is a big game for the richest and the most elitist people in the world who want to control everything, and they know that this is some serious stuff that we're getting ready to face, and they're worried about being able to feed 8 billion people or help medicate 8 billion people. What are we going to do with all this catastrophe, earthquakes, volcanoes, and bad weather? How are we going to treat this? Well, if we and look, this came out of Powell's mouth, the Fed. He wants to cut demand out of the supply and demand. Well, how do you cut demand? Well, if you cut jobs, then people don't have money to spend, so the demand goes down. And that's kind of what the WEF wants to do. They want to cut down demand so there's enough for them for when this catastrophe does happen, themselves and their families and the people that are associated with WEF and the Billionaires Club, they'll all live happily ever after in their slimy little huts somewhere underground. Meanwhile, folks like us who actually had a chance to help humanity, folks like us who had a chance to help change things and help unite communities and go back to the way it should be and the way it was. Folks like us are going to have a really, really tough time moving forward with all the censorship that we have, with all the the name calling before they even look at the research. I mean, that should tell you right there, they don't know what they're talking about. This is not science. This is an agenda, and this is about profits. And if I was lying, or if I didn't know what I was talking about, then a guy with 67,000 subscribers or followers who gets interviewed on Talk TV would not pay attention to me or even challenge me or even insult me, call me names. But he's a freedom fighter, the fighter for the good. Anyway. All right, let's say hello to some folks out there. Again, thank you guys for being patient with our broadcasting schedule. It's been crap. I apologize. We are trying to get back on track again. Yes, it's been less than 3 weeks since we did a show, so this is an improvement, right? I get some brownie points. I did one in the last 6 days. So anyway, I want to say hello to people in the chat. Shirley Davis, hello. Of course, hello to my wonderful wife, Mari. Hello to Arnold Schmidt, Knife Collector. As always, good to see you. Jerome, Melody, Lisa B, Whittle the Wood Elf. Okay, I like it. Stan, good to see you, my friend. David K, Tom Rowe. Hope everybody's been behaving in there. Well, don't smack anybody around, I don't think. Everybody's been pretty polite, it looks like. And many, many other familiar faces. Patricia Clayton, hello as well. Very enthusiastic Gardner Eli. Hello. Thank you for getting through the technical difficulties with the muting and changing of the video. But I think you guys get the point. If you go to my Twitter page, you can go and watch the 11-minute video without the Jake Riley commentary and hear what he really, and just listen to these answers. This guy's creepy. He's smug. He's, I don't care what you say. I'm right, you're wrong. Get over it. He's one of those guys. So, but again, after seeing this interview, I now realize that he is just a professional climate troll, and that's it. Oh, a rich one, because he is a director of 2 different biomass companies. So his pockets are really, really fat. He's their biggest poster. In fact, you ever seen the movie Idiocracy? When the workers at Costco, they stand in front of the line and say, "Welcome to Costco. I love you." And the guy that was in the White House where he's like, "This has been brought to you by Carl's Jr." And he's like, "Why do you keep saying that?" He goes, "Because I get paid every time I say it." And then, when the economy started crashing, he starts saying it over and over and over again so he gets paid. That's kind of what Gerald is. He's one of those. So, anyway. All right, guys, we hope you got something from tonight's video. Stay tuned. Yes, that's right. We will broadcast again this week. Lots of space weather to follow and many, many more other topics. Until next time, stay safe out there, and we will talk soon. Take care.
Do you like this show? Give us a thumbs up. Want to support us more? Share to your favorite social media platform. Buy a t-shirt or become a Patreon. All links are in the description below.